Since my divorce, I have found myself actively engaging in online forums like this one, and I feel compelled to share my personal story. Throughout my time spent reading various posts, I have encountered numerous individuals, particularly men, who seem to be making similar mistakes in their relationships. While I don't claim to be a perfect person, I believe that I handled my situation with a significant degree of strength and resilience. I successfully managed to regain the dignity and respect that my ex-wife attempted to take away from me. This entire experience unfolded a little over 4 years ago, when I was 46 years old and my wife, whom I will refer to as Grace, was 44. We had been married for a substantial 23 years and were blessed with 2 wonderful daughters, who were then aged 23 and 21. Our journey together began at a young age, largely prompted by the arrival of our first child, who came into the world a few months earlier than expected. Prior to discovering Grace's infidelity, if someone had asked me to rate our marriage on a scale of 1 to 10, I would have confidently given it an 11. Grace was a dedicated stay-at-home mom, and she excelled in that role. Not only did she raise our daughters into remarkable young women, but she also took on the responsibility of managing our home and ensuring that I was well taken care of. Her unwavering support of my career truly allowed us to create a wonderful family life. I often felt like I had hit the jackpot in the marriage department, especially when I compared my circumstances to those of many friends who seemed less fortunate and appeared unhappy in their own marriages. In my case, there were absolutely no signs of trouble in our relationship, not a single indication, right up until shortly before I unearthed the betrayal that would change everything. The turning point seemed to occur after our daughters had moved out, leaving Grace with a newfound abundance of free time. Initially, she channeled her energy into volunteering at our church and spending more meaningful moments with our parents. She even contemplated the idea of taking on a part-time job, although she found it challenging to locate one that captured her interest. Throughout this period, Grace persuaded me to adopt a puppy, affectionately named Barky. This lively little creature served to fill the void Grace felt after our daughters had left home. Raising and caring for Barky was no small task. It required a considerable amount of attention and responsibility. Grace took on the challenge wholeheartedly, managing everything from walking and feeding him to bathing and scheduling vet visits. She even dedicated time to house training and obedience training, and she genuinely seemed to enjoy having Barky around, despite the occasional mishap, such as the time he chewed up one of my favorite shoes and a beloved belt. Our physical intimacy had naturally slowed a bit over the years, yet we still managed to be intimate several times a week, which I considered quite respectful for a couple who had been together for over 2 decades. However, the first hint that something was amiss came when Grace stopped initiating physical intimacy, something we both typically shared the responsibility of initiating. This change occurred a few weeks before I uncovered her infidelity. In every other aspect of our married life, Grace continued to exhibit her loving demeanor. She would kiss me goodbye as I left for work and greet me with a kiss upon my return home. We would cuddle during the evenings, and she always desired to snuggle in bed. Everything seemed perfectly normal. In fact, she appeared to be even more affectionate during this time. Let's fast forward to the moment when my suspicions of her infidelity began to take shape. It was around 2:30 p.m., and after immersing myself in a lengthy report at the office, I felt the need for a break. I decided to head home for an hour to spend some quality time with Grace before returning to work, hoping it would rejuvenate me for the tasks ahead. As I drove home, I found myself waiting at a red light at the end of our street. This particular intersection is notoriously busy, and on that day, the red light felt like it was taking an eternity to change. While waiting, I noticed my wife walking from around the side of a house down the street from ours. I was somewhat familiar with the family living there, although we didn't know each other very well. The husband owned a trade business in town, and we were one of his customers. For the sake of privacy, I will refrain from disclosing his specific profession. This family, along with their children, was also part of our church community. As I sat there, my heart began to race. The visual of Grace walking away from that house, seemingly unaware of my gaze, began to stir feelings of unease and suspicion within me. This seemingly innocuous moment would mark the beginning of a tumultuous chapter in my life, one that would challenge the very foundation of the life I thought I knew. As I sat in my car, watching my wife approach our home, I decided to pull over to the curb and rolled down my window. With a light-hearted spirit, I playfully called out to her, asking, "Where have you been?" What was intended to be a jovial comment unexpectedly elicited a response that was anything but warm. Rather than the excited expression I anticipated, she looked at me as if she had been caught in something she shouldn't have been doing. When she climbed into the car, her body language suggested anxiety. She immediately shared that our dog had escaped and was running loose up the street. She claimed to have caught the dog and led it back, gripping its collar firmly. This raised my eyebrows because our dog, an elderly 18-year-old KLY mix I affectionately called Lady, could barely manage to walk, let alone dash away. Curiously, I asked if we had perhaps gotten a new dog. There was a noticeable hesitation in her voice before she confirmed that it was indeed Lady. She then nervously chuckled, commenting on how she had never seen Lady move so quickly in her life. My curiosity deepened, and I asked about Barky, our other dog, inquiring where he was during all this commotion. She assured me he was safe at home, which was odd because she usually brought him along for walks. As I processed the conversation, I caught a strong whiff of a cologne that smelled like Old Spice or something similar. When I brought it up, she dismissed it casually, saying, "Yeah, that guy really douses himself in it." I decided to refer to this man as Tad and his wife as Marcia. When I pressed her for details about how she ended up with that scent on her, she explained that she might have brushed against Tad while handing Lady over to him. I also asked if Marcia was at home during this encounter, but my wife replied that she didn't know. Upon arriving home, her demeanor only heightened my suspicions. She was jittery and engaged in rapid-fire conversations on various topics. I struggled to focus as the scent of cologne lingered uncomfortably in the air. I finally suggested she take a shower and mentioned that the smell was bothering her too. After a quick shower, she re-emerged wrapped in a towel, and we chatted for a bit before I headed back to work. However, my instincts were on high alert, sensing that something was truly amiss. A significant piece of evidence soon appeared that would solidify my suspicions. Before I left for the office, I headed to the bathroom, the very one she had just used, to wash my hands. As I reached for the soap, I noticed the dispenser was empty. I opened the lower cabinet to find a new bottle, and to my shock, I spotted a pair of her underwear at the back, draped over a shampoo bottle. When I picked them up, I noticed they were damp and carried the unmistakable scent of shampoo, as if they had just been washed and hidden away on the sly. The implications of this discovery hit hard, leaving me feeling a tidal wave of emotion. I quietly placed the underwear back where I found them, closed the cabinet, and composed myself, fighting the urge to confront her right then and there. Instead, I left for work, my mind racing with thoughts and questions. That evening, as Grace occupied herself in the kitchen, I began my quiet investigation. I casually checked her phone, searching for anything that might indicate wrongdoing, but found nothing of concern. Determined to uncover more, I turned my attention to the 7-day archive of our doorbell camera footage. As I scrutinized the recordings, I discovered that on 3 separate occasions during that week, Grace had left the house without Barky and remained gone for over an hour each time. This was highly unusual, given that she rarely took walks of that length, and her friends were typically not available during the day. The mounting evidence pointed clearly toward her meeting with Tad, but I knew I needed more concrete proof before confronting her. The thought of hiring a private investigator crossed my mind, but the overwhelming number of online listings made the decision difficult. Just then, I remembered a coworker whose father had worked as a police officer before turning to private investigation after retirement. I had played in a golf outing with him once and found him to be a trustworthy person. I reached out to my coworker to see if his father was still active in the business, but was informed that he had fully retired a few years back. The search for clarity in this troubling situation continued, and I felt that the pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, though I still needed to confirm the truth behind her actions. He inquired whether I needed any private investigation services, and I mentioned that I had a potential project in mind. He suggested that I have a conversation with his father, whom I will refer to as Frank, as he might offer invaluable guidance owing to his extensive experience in the field. Later that same day, Frank reached out to me via phone. I took that opportunity to disclose my predicament to him, laying out the details of my concerns and the situation I found myself in. To my surprise, Frank reacted positively, expressing an eagerness to assist me. He insisted that he would not require any payment for his help, stating that he genuinely enjoyed this kind of work, especially since it provided him with a chance to get out and about, something he felt he had been missing. Frank went on to elaborate that he had ceased taking on private investigation assignments several years ago. His decision stemmed from the extensive vehicle travel involved in such work, which he felt was no longer suitable for someone of his age, particularly at 82. However, despite his years, he appeared no older than 70, radiating a youthful vigor that surprised me. As my case seemed to revolve around the same street, he assured me that managing my job would be quite straightforward. Though I offered to pay him for his services, he ultimately accepted the arrangement on the condition that it would serve as an informal collaboration between us. The following morning, Frank began his surveillance efforts on our street, conducting observations that extended throughout the week. Despite his diligence, he reported back to me with no significant findings during that time. The only activity he noted was my wife, Grace, walking our dog, Barky, multiple times each day. Frank advised me to maintain patience, explaining that my wife might have adopted a more cautious approach following my near discovery of her actions. He reassured me that, based on his extensive experience, individuals often exhibited signs of cracking under circumstances like these, which could lead to revealing behavior. During this period, my wife continued to act normally, and I strove to manage my rising anger while keeping up a facade of normalcy. Nonetheless, I consciously decided to cease all forms of intimacy with her and repressed any displays of affection whenever possible. In the evenings, I deliberately opted to sit in a chair rather than on the couch to prevent her from snuggling up beside me. Additionally, I altered my position in bed, turning to my left side and facing away from her. I used the excuse of a sore back to discourage her from wanting to spoon with me. As the next week approached, Frank reported seeing nothing unusual on Monday and Tuesday. Doubts began to creep in, leading me to question whether my concerns were merely figments of my imagination. However, on Wednesday, while driving home, I received a call from Frank. He indicated he had something to show me, although it wasn't favorable news. According to him, Tad had returned home and parked his car in the garage around 2 p.m. What caught my attention, though, was that just 10 minutes later, my wife walked over and entered the back door of Tad's residence. She remained there for just over an hour before making her way back to our home. Frank had managed to capture video footage of these unsettling events, documenting both Tad's arrival and my wife's quick entry and exit. We arranged to meet in a restaurant parking lot down the street where he could share these troubling videos with me. Frank suggested that he continue to monitor my wife's activities for the remainder of the week, and I readily agreed, knowing I needed to gather more information. On Thursday, Frank reported that Grace again exhibited the same suspicious behavior. During dinner with Grace on Wednesday and Thursday evenings, I engaged her in casual conversation, asking about her day. Each time, she mentioned doing mundane tasks such as housework and walking Barky. This confirmation of her activities further solidified my decision to proceed with a divorce, aiming to catch her off guard with my intentions. On Friday, I sought out the best lawyer I could find, who agreed to take on my case. I provided him with the evidence that Frank had painstakingly gathered. The attorney explained that our state follows at-fault divorce laws that favor the aggrieved party. He noted that while the videos and pictures might not serve as absolute proof of my wife's infidelity, they certainly indicated strong evidence of her betrayal. He expressed confidence that this could exempt me from paying alimony. However, he did mention that we would need to divide any assets accumulated during our marriage. I relayed to him that although I wasn't particularly thrilled about parting with 50% of my wealth, I was prepared to accept it because Grace had been an exemplary wife and mother until the moment she betrayed my trust. As fate would have it, just 2 days later, I found myself in a more advantageous position to obtain conclusive evidence of her affair with Tad. I returned home from work a bit earlier than usual, and my wife informed me that she needed to make a quick trip to the store to pick up a few items, among them sweet corn for our dinner. When she finally left the house, a wave of urgency washed over me as I changed out of my work attire. I had barely finished unbuttoning my shirt and was in the midst of tossing it into the laundry basket when something caught my eye. A pair of her panties lay just beside the basket on the floor. At first glance, they seemed to have been intended for the laundry, but she had missed the target. I bent down to pick them up, and that's when the unsettling realization hit me like a cold wave. As my fingers grazed the fabric, I felt a dampness in the crotch area, an unmistakable sign that they had been worn. To make matters worse, they carried a smell that was a jarring mix of male and female bodily fluids, a scent that should never have been there. In that moment, rather than feeling the expected emotions of sadness or anger, a visceral thrill coursed through me, as if I had unearthed hidden treasure. I quickly grabbed a plastic freezer bag, treating the underwear with a careful reverence, sealing it inside as though it were evidence from a crime scene. My heart raced as I took the bag to the trunk of my car, sealing the chapter of discovery away for now, but knowing it would not be forgotten. Following that, I retreated to the bathroom, where I washed my hands vigorously with Dawn dish soap and baking soda, scrubbing until my skin felt raw, using the hottest water I could stand. Grace returned from her outing, blissfully unaware of what I had just found, and began preparing dinner. The atmosphere in the kitchen was pleasant, but inside, I was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Somehow, I managed to carry on as if everything were normal. I made a conscious effort to keep my composure in check, even assisting her with the dishes after dinner, standing shoulder to shoulder in silence. Later, as I sat in the living room with my laptop open, working but hardly focused, I had a full view of the kitchen and the laundry room. I watched as Grace entered the laundry room, her movements anxious and distracted. She rummaged through the space, searching for those missing panties. She checked under the washing machine, then the dryer, peered onto the shelf, and even pulled out the units to inspect behind them. Her search was frantic, and it struck me that I knew precisely where those panties were. Eventually, her search came to an end as frustration washed over her. She left the laundry room and joined me in the living room. As I sat there, a chilling thought enveloped me. My wife, at that very moment, was carrying another man's DNA within her. It dawned on me that she had planned to wash those soiled underwear alongside my clothes, an act that was not just careless, but betrayingly intimate. The level of disgust I felt was overwhelming and swiftly morphed into a deep-seated resentment towards her. The memories of the wonderful years we had shared began to fade, overshadowed by this singular act of betrayal that I would eternally associate with her. The following day, still reeling from the discovery, I confided in my attorney about the situation. He listened intently and advised me to hold on to the panties, explaining they might serve as critical evidence in court if my wife ever contested the allegations of her infidelity. He assured me that he would mention the underwear during pre-trial discussions with her legal representation once she secured an attorney of her own. He believed that simply indicating we possessed that piece of evidence would likely dissuade her from challenging the claim. Now, the wait began for my attorney to prepare the divorce papers, marking the next step in a process that felt both necessary and unbearable. In the interim, I confided in my family, telling my parents, my brother, and his wife about the distressing situation. Their reactions were predictable: disbelief. They struggled to grasp the idea that Grace could be capable of such betrayal. They offered their support in any way it could be of assistance. I articulated my wish for them to be present when I confronted Grace, and they readily agreed, extending their backing during this tumultuous time. The day of the confrontation arrived, and I decided to ask Grace to invite our parents, my brother, and sister-in-law over for coffee, using the guise of wanting to catch up since it had been a few weeks since we last gathered. She agreed enthusiastically, her eyes lighting up with excitement about preparing special desserts for the family. Upon returning home that evening, we shared dinner in a somewhat normal fashion, tidying up afterward as if nothing were amiss. Grace set the table with the desserts she had lovingly prepared and brewed a large pot of coffee, the aroma filling the air. Everyone arrived well before the appointed time, creating an atmosphere of warmth and familiarity in the dining room. As we settled around the table, my nerves tightened like a noose. Grace served coffee and desserts, her face glowing with affection as she chatted with our loved ones. For a fleeting moment, guilt washed over me, gnawing at my conscience for the confrontation I was about to initiate. That feeling, however, quickly dissipated, replaced by the resolve to bring the truth into the open. After everyone had a chance to enjoy their treat, I cleared my throat and informed the group that I had a surprise for Grace. She looked at me with affectionate anticipation, her eyes sparkling with a genuine warmth, completely oblivious to the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. I'll carry that expression with me forever, an indelible reminder of the moment before everything changed. I then proceeded to disclose the truth I had uncovered regarding Grace's month-long affair with Tad, a name I made sure to mention clearly during this tense moment. As I looked around, my family sat in stunned silence, while Grace's parents appeared utterly speechless, frozen in shock at the revelation. Grace, caught off guard, initially tried to feign ignorance about the situation, inquiring if I could clarify what I meant, as if she could shift the narrative away from the truth. However, it didn't take long for her composure to crack. Tears soon welled up in her eyes as she vehemently denied any wrongdoing, claiming what was happening was nothing more than a colossal misunderstanding. I felt compelled to inform her that I had hired a private investigator who had been meticulously following her over the past month. Perhaps I exaggerated slightly in my presentation of facts, but the purpose was clear. To add weight to my case, I revealed the existence of multiple videos capturing her secretive comings and goings to and from Tad's residence. In response to this mounting evidence, Grace hurriedly concocted an explanation, stating that she was merely visiting to help him with his dog. I pressed further, challenging her reasoning by questioning why she found it necessary to be alone with a male neighbor inside his home, particularly in the absence of his wife, and without informing me about these visits. I I repeated my request for a reasonable explanation, but her responses were nothing more than stammered attempts to fabricate something that sounded plausible. As her defenses crumbled, she broke down into heavy sobs, insisting that the situation was not as it seemed. Seizing the moment, I played my trump card by revealing that I had found a pair of her soiled underwear and had taken the precaution of having them tested. I stated that the results indicated the presence of another man's DNA, which was unmistakably not mine. While perhaps I had slightly stretched the truth in that moment, it achieved the intended effect. She shifted from her earlier stance of claiming a misunderstanding to one of utter regret, profusely apologizing and pleading for my forgiveness. Her attempts at deception and gaslighting were repulsive to me. Amid her sobbing, with her hands clasped together in what appeared to be a gesture of prayer, she looked at me with desperation, imploring me for leniency. I chose to remain silent, allowing the weight of the situation to hang in the air. Minutes passed as she continued to cry, eventually lowering her head onto the table in despair. In a compassionate gesture, her mother approached to comfort her, a sight that added another layer of complexity to the heartbreaking scene. It was then that I turned to my parents, brother, and sister-in-law, signaling that it was time for us to leave this emotionally charged environment. With tears welling in her eyes, Grace asked about my intentions, and I firmly conveyed that I would be moving out until our divorce was finalized. At my words, her tears flowed even more freely, as if she were suffering unbearable anguish, once again laying her head down on the table. My sister-in-law, Sel, stepped in to console her, joining her mother in guiding Grace back to our master bedroom, all the while trying to soothe her distress. Grace's father, overwhelmed and utterly bewildered by the unfolding drama, turned to me, asking in shock what had just transpired. Struggling to comprehend the situation, he began to apologize profusely, desperately seeking some understanding of the events that had unraveled. As my sister-in-law emerged from the bedroom, she gently proposed that we part ways for the moment, suggesting that she and Grace remain behind to ensure everything was all right. Sel held a special place in my heart, akin to an older sister, and I was deeply grateful for the support she was so willingly offering as I navigated the tumultuous waters of my divorce. That evening, I spent the night at my parents' house, processing the whirlwind of emotions that had overtaken my life. The following morning, I reached out to my daughters to share the devastating news. I disclosed every detail of what had transpired, watching as they reacted with shock and sadness, struggling to comprehend how their own mother could engage in such behavior, especially with Tad, whose last name resonated painfully in our family. They mentioned that they wished to call her together following our conversation, expressing their desire to voice their anger and possibly sever ties with her permanently. I conveyed my support and pride in their decision to take such a stance, which they ultimately acted upon. The next day, I noticed 7 missed calls from Tad's business line, fueling my suspicions that Grace had alerted him, prompting him to reach out to me in an attempt to prevent me from informing his wife. This only intensified my frustration. To address the chaos, that afternoon I paid a visit to the insurance agency where Marcia was employed. I needed to have a serious conversation with her, and since I held my homeowner's insurance policy with that agency, the agent assumed my visit was simply related to a policy question. The office was fortunately empty when I arrived, providing an unexpected opportunity for a private conversation. With no one else around, I approached her and inquired if she had a few minutes to speak. She readily agreed, confirming that there were no other staff members present. I didn't hesitate and got straight to the point. I broke the heartbreaking news to her. At first, she struggled to accept what I was telling her, disbelief clouded her reaction. However, as I presented her with the videos that documented the betrayal, her composure shattered, and tears began to flow. I took a deep breath and informed her that my wife had already confessed to the affair. I disclosed that it had been taking place at their house for about a month. Once again, disbelief flickered across her face, but she managed to share something that had been troubling her. She mentioned an unusual scent, a perfume-like fragrance, that she had noticed in their bedroom recently. I explained that it was likely my wife's perfume, recalling a moment when my wife had come home one day reeking of cheap cologne, raising my own suspicions. Curiosity piqued as she asked about my future plans, and I revealed my intention to file for divorce. The weight of that revelation hit her hard, and she erupted into tears yet again, expressing her incredulity over the situation we both found ourselves in. As she composed herself, she confided in me that she might contemplate a similar decision regarding her own marriage, but she needed time to process everything. During our conversation, I mentioned that her husband had made 7 attempts to reach me that very morning, suggesting that he likely had an inkling that the affair had come to light. She signaled that she would leave shortly to confront him, which seemed to embolden her. We exchanged words of gratitude for the conversation and shared our cell phone numbers before I left the office, grappling with a mixture of emotions. I felt a sense of accomplishment for having confronted the truth, yet I was weighed down by a profound sympathy for her and her children. She was an inherently kind person, dedicating a significant portion of her time to volunteer work within our church community. Neither of us deserve to be in this situation. Life sometimes deals out difficult hands, and we must learn to play them as best we can. After the confrontation, I chose to stay with my parents for the following weeks, seeking comfort in their presence. However, as the days passed, I realized I needed my own space and decided to rent a furnished apartment near my office, as both my parents' and brother's homes were nearly an hour away from where I worked. From the day of our confrontation until the finalization of my divorce, Grace made continuous efforts to persuade me to reconsider my decision. She expressed a willingness to agree to anything if I would choose to stay in the marriage. Yet, I stood firm in my decision, rejecting all her offers. My attorney had advised me to refrain from engaging in discussions with her. If I had to, I was instructed to record our conversations and inform her beforehand that I would be doing so. This became my new normal. Whenever she left me a message or texted regarding our relationship, I opted to ignore it. However, if the communication was about our house or our children, I would respond. Inevitably, during our calls, she would dissolve into tears, a sobbing mess as she pleaded with me to reconsider. Each time, I had to assertively remind her that the possibility of reconciliation was no longer on the table and that she needed to come to terms with that reality. After countless conversations like this, one day I reached my breaking point. I bluntly suggested that she should pursue a relationship with Tad now that they were both about to be free. Her reaction was immediate. She cried and insisted that she hated him and wanted nothing to do with him. I pressed further, questioning how she could feel that way when she had taken such a monumental risk with our marriage for moments of intimacy with him. Through her tears, she admitted she didn't know how it had come to this, begging me to never mention him again, claiming she wanted to die for the pain she caused. She expressed that I had been her entire world, and apart from our children, she felt she had nothing left worth living for. I reminded her that perhaps she should have considered those feelings before engaging in an affair. Eventually, our divorce was concluded in a civil manner, though not without its own last-minute drama during the courtroom proceedings. At one point, my wife requested the opportunity to speak, catching both me and her attorney off guard. Turning toward me, she expressed her desire to apologize officially for her actions and extended her gratitude for the wonderful life I had provided her. She professed her enduring love for me and conveyed a hope for forgiveness and a friendship in the future. In response, I simply nodded and said, "Thank you, Grace," before turning back to face the judge. While the prospect of forgiveness seemed unlikely, I appreciated her willingness to express her regret. The judge then asked if I had anything else to add, to which I simply replied no. He proceeded to make his final decision, which aligned with what my attorney had already anticipated. There would be no alimony, and the division of our marital assets would be fair. Navigating this complex situation required a strong sense of self-respect and an unwavering commitment to my core values. From the very beginning of my relationship with Grace, I established that infidelity was a non-negotiable boundary for me. I made this point abundantly clear, and she echoed a similar commitment in our discussions. Unfortunately, despite our mutual understanding, she repeatedly crossed that line, fully aware of the consequences that such actions would entail. While I never envisioned myself single at this point in my life, I have found a sense of peace and contentment in my current situation, free from lingering regrets. As for the updates in my life, it feels appropriate to share where I stand now, especially in light of the thoughtful responses I received to my initial post. My life has significantly improved post-divorce. I have successfully purchased a new home that is conveniently located closer to my workplace. This transition has allowed me to invest considerable time in remodeling the house, painting the interior, and customizing the space to reflect my personal preferences. My 2 daughters are thriving, both have graduated from college, and I am excited to share that my eldest daughter is set to marry this upcoming summer. I eagerly anticipate welcoming her fiancé into our family, as he is a dependable and admirable individual. Regarding Grace, my ex-wife, it appears that she is gradually adjusting to her new lifestyle following our decision to sell the house. After selling, she spent about 6 months living with her parents and has recently moved into her own apartment. In terms of her career, she has secured a position at Safeway, working in one of the departments. According to my daughters, she genuinely enjoys her work, and it seems to have positively impacted her overall mood. On a personal note, I have re-entered the dating scene. Currently, I am seeing the real estate agent who assisted me when I purchased my new home. She, too, is divorced and has 2 children, with her marriage ending under circumstances similar to mine. Like me, she has no interest in remarriage, we simply enjoy spending quality time together. There's a strong physical connection that is common in new romantic relationships. As for Grace, she has not yet ventured into the dating world again. She has communicated to my daughters and my parents that she is not interested in pursuing a new relationship with another man at this point. Instead, she has expressed a hope that someday, there may be a possibility for reconciliation between us. Until that day arrives, she has mentioned that her dog Barky will remain her only male companion. Although I genuinely wish her happiness and am pleased to see her adapting to her new circumstances, I have no intention of reconciling with her after the pain and betrayal I experienced. In instances where our paths must cross, such as my daughter's wedding, I plan to maintain a polite and courteous demeanor. However, outside of those necessary interactions, I intend to limit our communication to protect my well-being. I want to take a moment to express my gratitude to everyone who took the time to respond to my earlier post. Knowing that my experiences resonated with several of you who are facing similar challenges is truly rewarding. To those who suggested that I might possess toxic traits or self-esteem issues, I want to clarify that this is not the case. I perceive myself as a strong, masculine individual with a successful career, and I take pride in my self-reliance and confidence. I consider these qualities to be positive attributes, and while I respect differing opinions, I stand firm in my self-assessment. Now that I've shared this chapter of my story, I am eager to move forward and dive into another exciting narrative. Stay tuned for what comes next. Story 2. I am a 32-year-old male, and I have been in a committed relationship with my wife, who is currently 31 years old, for a total span of 11 years. Out of those 11 years, we have been married for 8. Our journey together began during our college years when we first met. We started dating about halfway through our time at university, sharing experiences and ambitions that strengthened our bond. After graduation, we took our next big step by moving in together, eager to tackle the challenges and joys that come with post-college life as partners. During those early years, my wife played an invaluable role in my life, helping me navigate the complexities of adulthood. Her unwavering support made the transition much more manageable. Once we both secured solid jobs and established stable incomes, I felt a strong urge to propose to her. The desire to marry her and commit to spending the rest of my life together was overwhelming. When I presented her with my proposal, she accepted with joy, and shortly thereafter, we celebrated our marriage, setting forth on a shared path to build a harmonious life together. As we settled into married life, we welcomed a child into our family and purchased our first home in the suburbs, which reflected the dreams we had nurtured over the years. Both my wife and I are dedicated professionals. Our hard work and determination have been rewarded with various promotions and career opportunities. A year ago, my wife was honored with a significant promotion at her workplace, which came with a personal office and an assistant. I was proud of her achievements and participated in all office gatherings and events alongside her. Her workplace had become a close-knit community. Over time, we forged a delightful circle of friends among her colleagues. One day, out of the blue, I received an unexpected text message from one of her coworkers, someone I considered a good friend. The message contained alarming news suggesting that my wife might have engaged in inappropriate behavior with an intern. This revelation took me completely off guard, and I struggled to process the information, finding it hard to believe initially. When my wife returned home later that day, I decided to show her the message and confronted her about it. She appeared genuinely shocked and assured me that she was unaware of what her coworker was referring to. She promised to address the situation the following morning, expressing her concern about the potential for a false sexual harassment accusation or similar issue. Her distress was palpable, making it difficult for me to ascertain the truth. However, I leaned toward trusting her, as she had never given me any reason to doubt her fidelity throughout our entire relationship. The next day, when my wife came home, she informed me that she had confronted her coworker. According to him, he believed he had witnessed something inappropriate through her office window. My wife clarified that what he had observed was merely her sitting close to the intern while helping him with a task on the computer. The intern also corroborated her explanation, reassuring the coworker that nothing untoward was occurring. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as the situation seemed to be resolved. While I had never suspected my wife of cheating, it was comforting to know that she had proactively addressed the concern with her colleague. Weeks later, my office granted all employees a 4-day weekend due to some building renovations. I had the upcoming Monday off, and I thought it would be a lovely surprise to bring lunch to my wife at work. I stopped at her favorite restaurant, ordered her usual meal, and made my way to her office. On the way, I encountered a few of her coworkers, and we exchanged pleasant conversation before I continued on to my wife's workspace. I had visited her office numerous times before, and usually, I would knock gently a couple of times, then peek in to say hello. However, this time, I discovered that the door was locked. I assumed she must have been in a meeting and wanted to avoid any interruptions. While waiting outside, I sensed some movement on the other side. My wife called out for a moment to wait, and I complied patiently. When she finally opened the door, I was greeted with a surprising sight. There was a young man seated at her desk, and a chair was positioned next to hers. My wife introduced me to her in turn, and I couldn't help but notice that he had flushed cheeks and his hands were resting awkwardly on his groin. Given the previous accusations made by her coworker, I found it quite surprising that my wife would be in such close quarters with her intern behind a locked door. The situation raised questions and unease within me, stirring a mix of emotions as I processed the moment. At that moment, a wave of unease washed over me as I approached my wife to let her know I had brought her lunch. Her heartfelt thank you felt hollow amid a growing sense of discomfort. As she instructed her intern to take an early lunch, I noticed the door was locked and instinctively questioned her about it. She casually remarked that she hadn't realized the door was locked, suggesting that she must have inadvertently bumped into it. Her explanation seemed plausible, given that it was one of those push-button locks that could easily be accidentally engaged. The intern, visibly eager to leave, quickly exited the office, allowing me to sit down and share a meal with my wife. Yet, even as I sat there, the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that my arrival had interrupted something significant. The intern's demeanor had raised some red flags. There was an odd tension in the air that I couldn't ignore, particularly in light of what a coworker had previously confided in me. Later that evening, an unfamiliar silence was broken by a phone call from my wife. She informed me about a last-minute Zoom meeting with overseas clients and mentioned that she would be returning home much later than usual. This was highly unusual for her. Her schedule was typically so full that sudden meetings were rare. My suspicions deepened, and I found myself grappling with a growing sense of distrust about the situation. After much contemplation, I decided it was necessary to reach out to the coworker who had initially alerted me about the intern. When I contacted him and probed for more details about his observations, he hesitated before hinting at something troubling. He believed he had seen my wife in a compromising situation with the intern, or at least in a position that suggested intimacy. My mind began racing as I questioned the legitimacy of her allegedly last-minute meeting. He voiced his doubts about its authenticity, which only fueled my suspicion regarding the dynamics at play. It was crucial to mention that this coworker was in direct competition with my wife for a promotion. I recognized that his motivations might not be entirely sincere. However, if his assertion held any truth, I had no choice but to conduct a thorough investigation. He proposed that we meet at the office since he had the necessary clearance to access the area. I agreed, and within 15 minutes, we were navigating through the building toward their offices. As we approached, the unmistakable sounds of intimacy filled the air, confirming my worst fears. Even though I couldn't see them yet, the recognition of those familiar sounds told me it was indeed my wife. Drawing upon a mix of anger and determination, we continued forward, intent on catching them in the act. Upon opening the door, I was met with an alarming sight. My wife was at her desk, and the intern was frantically attempting to pull away and cover themselves. My wife struggled to find the words to justify her actions, but the shock of being discovered left her speechless. I left the office consumed by rage, regretting that I had no documented proof of infidelity. However, I was thankful for the presence of my coworker who could serve as a witness to the betrayal. The following day, I reached out to the coworker who witnessed the incident with me. He informed me that he would be reporting what had transpired to HR. As the day unfolded, I overheard my wife on the phone, and it became painfully clear that she was being terminated from her position. She appeared shattered by the conversation. The intern also faced the same fate, being let go from their internship. When I inquired about any repercussions my coworker might face for his involvement, he explained that he likely wouldn't receive credit for the internship and might have to retake the course. While this consequence wasn't as severe as what my wife faced, I couldn't help but feel that my spouse, given her position, had exploited her authority. Faced with the gravity of the situation and armed with the testimony of my coworker who witnessed the infidelity, I decided to proceed with filing for divorce. The evidence, albeit circumstantial, would support my case. As the process unfolded, my wife lost her job, her home, and my support, along with limited custody of our child. All stemming from what I perceived as a senseless affair with her in turn. The ramifications of that decision rippled through our lives, altering our family dynamics in ways that would take time to comprehend fully.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, and click on the little bell icon for notifications of new stories.